questions that are raised after today's events. And to speak to me now about this is Dr. Haseeb Drabu, who's the former Finance Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. Najib Shah, former Chairman of CBEC, is also on the show this evening, as is MS Mani partner Deloitte India. Welcome to all of you and thank you for speaking with us. Dr. Drabu, let me begin by just getting your take on what's going on. Should states have to borrow in a limited window from the RBI or from the market directly? What do you make of the two options, and who will bear the burden of this? Who pays the interest?
I don't even want to go to that, whether those options should be considered. I mean, there are matters of principle involved, and I think we need to reiterate those matters of principle. First, I think this meeting started on a wrong footing. It started on the wrong foot, for sure. This issue should not be positioned as a center versus states issue. It is not a center versus states issue. That's point number one. And if that wasn't enough, then a set of state finance ministers are surprised by a table agenda where an AG's view is given about obligations of the center. The Union of India can't hide behind a technicality of an AG. The arrangement that has been worked out has legislative sanction and a democratic mandate. It can't be decided on a technicality, however brilliant that might be. So I think you need to look at those two issues before you even begin to kind of reassess the whole compensation issue. It was decided by the Union of India, the Government of India, with the states, approved by the GST Council, taken to the Parliament, got parliamentary sanction, went across 30 legislatures of states, which was approved by that. And on that, it's not a bilateral deal between two people. These are governments involved, and as Manpreet was saying, it's not a banana republic. There is a proper, method in which it has been done, and it was agreed upon. So it's not about who should pay. That is decided by law, by rules. GST would not have been accepted by the states if compensation was not agreed upon. I was there at those meetings. It's sad to see this happen to the council today, which had taken all decisions on a unanimous footing. Of course, there's a problem. It needs to be looked at. So what should be discussed is not whether the government will compensate or who will compensate, but how the need for compensation should be financed. And here I want to make an important point, which I heard you also speak about, compensation cess. There was nothing like compensation cess. It's a misnomer. There's a compensation fund, which is supposed to compensate states for loss of revenue. It doesn't go back to the minutes of the GST thing. It was not about, it was an open-ended compensation. I have lots to say on that, but that's separate. It was decided that that compensation will be paid till a certain date. Now, the issue today is how will it get financed? So cess was used as a financing item for compensation. It's not a compensation cess. It's a wrong word to use. It's a cess which has been used or earmarked by the council for financing compensation needs. This arose out of a requirement which that time the Union Finance Minister pointed out that whatever central government raises, 43% goes to states, so it will not be possible to fund from its own coffers the entire compensation requirement such as may arise. Therefore, some cesses should be dedicated towards that.
Right.
The states agreed because those cesses are not devolvable and are not shared. They are in some ways centers receipts. So that also is an indication that this liability for compensation rests with the center and nobody else. To do this today is to go back on a commitment on which all states agreed to, irrespective of party lines, agreed to get onto the GST regime. Now, this kind of a thing reflects a certain disregard for institutional propriety, as we have seen earlier in the case of Reserve Bank of India. So I am today worried more than just the fact of what will happen to states. I'm worried about what will happen to the federalism, fiscal federalism. what will happen to GST as an institution of fiscal federalism if this kind of an attitude is exhibited by the Union of India. I mean, it cannot today say that we can't pay compensation. You can certainly look at what are the modalities for it, how do we finance it. It can be a joint effort. I'm open to looking at an entirely new gamut of compensation scheme post whatever date has been decided. In fact, if you go back to minutes, I had raised objections then, and I had a big fight with one of my best friends, Thomas Isaac and Manpreet, essentially on the issue that, I also felt it was an open-ended scheme. But now things have come to a pass where we are facing a crisis, which is unexpected. Therefore, you need to look at how to resolve this issue rather than run away from it, hiding behind a technicality. Not done.
Is the government or the central government hiding behind technicalities? Mr. Najib Shah, let me come to that with 3 words that were used by the finance minister today, and very crucial ones. Act of God. She, of course, spoke about it in the context of possibly, the economy, negative growth this year in the economy, which is known. The Reserve Bank of India has also said it. But it also seems to imply that these are unusual times. This is an unusual set of circumstances. And which is also what the AG was pointing out to. That this is not the natural or regular order of things. Does the center have the same responsibility and liability in the case of an act of God?
I think so. And I think I would suggest that the center, while resorting to the AG's opinion, was not really trying to hide behind the AG's opinion as much as laying out some issues on the table. You see, the amounts involved are humongous. This is an unusual situation. While in every contractual obligation, force majeure is an issue, be there written in the contract or not. And this is an act of God to the extent that it has hurt both the center and the states. I do believe that the amount of 2.35 lakh crores, which is what has been mentioned by the finance minister, and 97,000 crores being only because of the problems arising due to the implementation of GST, is an amount which cannot be met merely from the compensation fund, because no amount of cess is going to give that sort of money. So we have to look at some of the sources of funds. I do believe that 7 days down the line, things may not be as heated, in the sense I do believe that things will be resolved, because everybody now is looking at how to fund this shortfall. And this is an option which has been given of borrowing, and the center committing it to pay back that borrowing. That's what I understand from the finance secretary's statement, by resorting to cess if need be beyond the 5-year timeline, which can be extended on the recommendation of the GST Council by the Parliament. So I believe that this is the way to find some solution, and we are looking at solutions now. There is no money on the table. The center and the states, neither of them have money. We have to fund it. How to fund it, this compensation is what is being examined. I think we need to wait for 7 days and see how it goes forward.
Look, if you take a look at the responses that have come right after the meeting from some state finance ministers, and we're constantly running those from you, it doesn't seem like there will be any clear resolution in 7 days. In fact, Mr. Manpreet Singh Badal, in his interview to me, said that they will be looking at the option of going through the dispute resolution mechanism if nothing turns up. But I want to focus a bit on the options on the table. MS Mani, explain these options to me. Who is doing the borrowing? How is this debt being serviced? Where is the repayment going to come from? Who finally, shells out the money?
Look, what we understood today was that the borrowing is to be done by the RBI. As far as the repayment is concerned, the repayment would be done by the respective states to the extent of the borrowing by the states. And I believe a mention was made that of the deficit which is there is some deficit which is on account of the slowdown, and there is some deficit which is on account of the pandemic. So the pandemic was what was referred to as the act of God, and that is something for which the finance minister mentioned that both the center and the states were equally liable for. But having said that, in terms of what is to be done and how to go about it, as I understood today, there are broadly only 3 options on the table. And I would actually bring them down to 2 specific options when it comes to business. Either at some point of time, there is going to be an increase in the rate of cess on the products that already attract cess, or possibly there would be a thought process, may not be now, maybe 6 months from now, when things improve, to expand the basket to which cess relates. This is broadly one option which I look at, the rate option. The other option is the cesses that are there today remain the same, but the time limit gets extended from 5 years to maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years. If either of these 2 options are exercised, I would say at a very broad level, most of the businesses would be disappointed. Because while we have been discussing what is the perspective of the state and what is the perspective of the center, which are all very valid perspectives, we also need to bear in mind that the tax and the cess is finally being paid by a business. It's being paid by a business house on what they manufacture and what they sell. And therefore, at some point of time, any call that needs to be taken.
Cess is passed on money. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to interject here to say that cess is eventually passed on. So when I asked you who's footing the bill, it's essentially the average Indian who's going to foot the bill one way or the other.
Exactly. And therefore, that leads to the question by saying that in this whole process of cess, for a minute, if we assume that the rates of cess are not going to increase in the short term, and therefore the easier option is to extend the cess by 2 more years or 3 more years. Now, when the GST was introduced, it was introduced with a very clear understanding that the earlier cesses and surcharges and the multiplicity of taxes would be subsumed into one tax. 17 or 18 taxes were subsumed into one tax, and therefore business houses were very enthusiastic about it. At some point of time, there was felt a need to compensate states. We said, look, we are going to have a cess which is time bound, which is on a few products, with which you don't have to grapple with after 2022. Now, if that framework changes and we say, no, it's going to get extended, maybe 23, maybe 24, maybe 25. Now, that is something which will be very, very upsetting to business. Because bear in mind that in the past, there have been a few cesses which have been levied for a specific purpose, but over a period of time have acquired the characteristic of a tax. So the worry would be that if the duration of the cess, the tenure of the cess gets extended, in that case, all businesses, all end consumers would end up paying the cess for an extended period of time. Now, my sense, therefore, would be that in any process of consultation that happens, the views of business and the views of the consumers who eventually foot the bill have to be finally considered as well.
No, I have one more question. I have one more question about this 97,000. And let me take this to Dr. Drabu. It's been said that out of the entire shortfall, 97,000 crores is because of the implementation of GST and the remainder is due to the pandemic. How would you come to that conclusion? How would you distinguish the amount of shortfall and why it has come about?
Look, first of all, you can go back to the minutes of the GST councils. There is no mention of any of this, that it is, a thing being put on it, the compensation relates to loss of this, because it was a general open-ended compensation, which was problematic from day one. But really speaking, how does one isolate it? That is problem one. Second, is the act of God only an act of God for central government? Is it not an act of God for state governments? Because for every rupee that is collected by center, 43 paisa go to the states, which means if center drops 100 rupees, 50% of that virtually is borne by the states. This is in addition to their own SGST fall. And the third layer of the problem is that they are the front end spenders in this, whether it's education or health or whatever. It is basically the states. Center has no obligation to spend money on those areas, the state subject areas. So really speaking, how does one isolate this, and how does one isolate the whole issue of Act of God? It reminds me of that Paresh Rawal film of Act of God on insurance. I mean, I think policymakers need to see that, which is why I'm saying, first of all, before you look at the compensation deficit, please resolve the commitment deficit. There is complete clarity that this has to be funded by the center. I'm not for a moment saying the state should not kind of work with the center to find ways and means to do it. By all means, I would go a step further. I would look at a minimum guaranteed kind of a solution rather than a compensation in such times, so that you actually, as a policymaker, you need some assurance that this is the amount I'll get and I'll tailor my requirements to that. You can't just, after having agreed to a compensation, decide to take away these things through a change in methodology. That now there is 97,000 crores. Who has assessed that? Is there a third-party assessment? On what basis do you isolate the pandemic? It's not a one-way causal effect. So, and also even prior to COVID,
Exactly.
There has been a slowdown. And in fact, what really is a big concern that today, the three things that seem to have kind of been registered in the mind of everybody, which has slowed down the Indian economy, apart from demonetization and COVID, GST stands as a big policy initiative, which I think is very sad because it's an absolutely wonderful kind of a regime that would see a lot of dividends. And we were beginning to see some revenue buoyancies before the COVID thing happened.
No, I mean, that's...
So...
Yes. No, so I want to actually come to this point. Mani, I want your view on this. How has this 97,000 crore rupees been identified separately? Would that stand up to any kind of scrutiny? And on the face of it, do you think we're going to see any kind of resolution to this in the next 7 days? From the initial responses which are coming in, states are not going to get on board with a solution where they have to go out and borrow for an amount that they are actually owed. What is the other option that could come onto the table which would be acceptable to all sides?
Look, I think we need to accept the fact that there is a serious problem that we have in hand. So irrespective of who is liable to pay and who pays whom, the fact remains that the finances of the center and the finances of the state both are under strain. So I think one acceptance that we need to bear in mind is, while we all are talking of cess and we are talking of a deficit which the finance minister mentioned today, we also have a larger issue in terms of the fact that the GST collections themselves have slowed down. So what happens to that deficit in terms of that? So if we admit the fact that yes, there is a larger issue in hand that we have, and that is because of the fact that the economy has been slowing down because of the pandemic that has closed down businesses for a long period of time, consumption has really dipped. The tax collections of both the center and the states and the municipal corporations are all under pressure. So that's an admitted fact that we have to bear in mind. Now, if we keep that in mind, what are the options available to anybody to finance it? I believe the finance minister mentioned during the meeting today in the subsequent press conference that the government was willing to look at relaxations in respect of the fiscal deficit. So she mentioned the fact that there was already a relaxation that was provided to take it from 3 to 3.5. Subsequent to that, there were a series of conditional relaxations which were made. Yeah. And it was also said that on account of this, there could be a further relaxation. Because otherwise, if the collections of the center and the states on account of GST and various other revenues, so to be fair, to the center and the states, we also have to bear in mind, states also have alternate revenue collection mechanisms, such as levying a VAT on petroleum products and levying a VAT and state excise duty on alcoholic beverages. Those are also under strain, and states have suffered because of that as well. So overall, when we look at it, the finances of both the central government and the state governments are all under strain. And whatever solution, therefore, is found out is something which needs to address all of these and not look at the limited issue of how do we compensate states. To my mind, it's a much larger issue on how do we raise funds so that the development expenditure of the governments, both state and center, so that the extra expenditure on account of the healthcare related issues, all of these are finite.
I would just say, I get your point, Mani, but I would just say to that if A owes B money, it can't really beyond a point be okay to say that, hey, both A and B are going through a bad time. If you look at the principle of it, and that is what states are fighting for, it is that you promised you would compensate my losses. That's why I agreed to GST and giving up my right to tax in the first place. You cannot renege on it now because hard times have hit us. And saying that hard times have hit both of us is just not good enough. That's sort of the crux of the fight. I just want to get a quick word in from Mr. Najib Shah. In this sense, what should be the priority? And should the priority also be to ensure that the way the GST Council has been functioning so far, a true really testament to federalism, unanimous decisions all through, despite differences between parties and politics outside, this council has managed to come through. Do you think they will come through this time round?
I really hope and pray so. There is a provision in the Constitution for a dispute resolution mechanism. It has never been felt necessary to use it so far. I hope this issue does not necessitate such a solution, because I would still believe that the center will like to meet its commitment. We are in a very bad situation. I mean, let's face it, like you did point out, okay, the center owes money to the states, and so what if the state also badly hit? They jolly well have to give that money. But where should we give the money from is the point that the center is trying to lay on the table and get the cooperation of the states. Now, it is going to, unfortunately, I have not yet seen the official press release after the GST Council meeting. It has not yet come till around 15 minutes back. What I did see is only the press statements, and it appeared that the center will fulfill its commitment by raising funds from the cess beyond the period of 5 years. Given the amounts involved, 97,000 crores only because of GST implementation, 235,000 crores, as Mr. Mani pointed out, this may not be the right time at all for increasing the cess amounts, which is the way in which it was contemplated that the compensation will be funded. If you're not going to do that, where else is the money going to come from? So I think you really have a catch-22 situation.
Right.
And it's a difficult, very, very difficult call.
Keeping the faith and sort of the true spirit of federalism between center and state, and not letting that all come apart in these stressful times and distressing times, I think should be the top priority. We will be watching the story very closely. The center has given the states 7 days to come back with their responses. Will there be a middle path, or one of the options, will they be palatable to all states, will remain to be seen. I want to thank all of you for joining us in the first discussion this evening. We'll take a very short break. When we come back, we turn our focus to the resurgence in the rural economy. Well, is that resurgence for real? Is it sustainable? And how can we make sure it's not just a flash in the pan? That discussion coming up next.